Wow, that's a great question. And interestingly enough, Sean, it is a different question than most folk ask. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit Sunday. A lot of people ask, when did you know you were going to be a preacher? And but very seldom do folk ask, when did you know you were a leader? And sometimes those two are synonymous, and sometimes they're not. And as a result of that, we sometimes get confused the fact that a preacher is also a leader, or that a leader has to be a preacher, particularly in the African American context, because historically, so many of our leaders were preachers. For me, there is a difference. They often converge at a point. They often come to a place where they meet and merge, but they are not necessarily, for me, symbiotic. They are not necessarily one and the same, because a person can certainly be a leader and not be a preacher. And one could conceivably, sad to say, be a preacher and really not exert the leadership that they have. So I think I first came to know that I was a leader as a kid, because John Maxwell says leadership is influence. And I knew as a kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, that I had influence. That I would say, let's play this game. And everybody would say, okay, and they'd follow me. And if somebody was playing something else, I'd say, you know what, I think I'm going to the store. And everybody would drop what they were doing and they'd come to the store with me. It wasn't until years and years later that I look back and realized, man, I exerted influence even at that young age. And it was natural. Now, I don't know how far you want to go into this or how deep you want this to be, so feel free to edit this. I don't think leadership at its best is ever manipulative. So that when I wasn't trying to manipulate. If they hadn't gone with me, I would have gone to the store by myself. If they didn't want to play what I wanted to play, I probably would have eventually joined in with them. So it wasn't manipulative. It wasn't, I'm going to take my bat and ball and go home. It was very often, I just would say it and people would respond. Other kids, my sisters. So I think leadership can't, well, I won't say can't, shouldn't be manipulative, because when it's that, I don't know if that's leadership as much as that's coercion. Oh yeah, yeah. I think the ones that I gave, another one would be in school. Now you gotta remember, Sean, I have always been tall, for my age, taller, and I've always had a rather strong voice, and I've always had a presence. And so even in school, and I loved to read, and I spoke well. And I'm not saying that in any braggadocious way, I'm just saying. And the combination of those things, I think just always afforded me, taller than almost any of my, I'm thinking now back to who my childhood friends were. I don't think there were any taller than me. Might have been one or two, maybe eyeball to eyeball. But, just the ability, even in school. So I got elected to a lot of, student government stuff. And so even there. And in Sunday school, in church. Yeah. Wow, man, Sean, that's a great question. And the reason why it's a great question is because it speaks to life. I could quickly rattle off names that you would recognize, and they've been with me as models all of my life. But as I've gotten older, my pantheon of heroes has expanded. and so there are heroes and heroines in it. Certainly, Dr. King, but he was such a force of nature. Adam Clayton Powell, because of what both he and Dr. King were preachers and leaders. Dr. Powell served in Congress from Harlem, from New York. Of course, Dr. King was a preacher, pastor, but also a social activist, civil rights leader. So the two of them. But then in my own context, and you've heard me preach about this because you've sat Sunday after Sunday and you've heard me preach over the years. My spiritual father, my childhood pastor, Dad Cray, who I called Dad. He was not my biological dad, but I called him Dad. Pop Scott, Pop Kelly, you've heard me call those names. Benjamin Reed, Marcus Morgan, Sam Hines, William Aaron, Evans Marshall. Those are men who were ministers when I was a kid who I looked up to. So my pantheon expanded. And then I learned my grandmother, my mom, watching and understanding years later what they went through, what they sacrificed, how they served. And that has added them to my list, yeah. That's good. Can I have three? I love to read. And now this is going to sound strange. I don't get to read like I used to in this way. I used to read for sheer enjoyment. Now I read for work. And you know this, it's totally different, totally different. When I read now, it's research, illustrations, confirmation on sermon things. I want to do a research on something in a sermon, want to make sure I have the facts right, so I'll read on that. Or if I'm preaching in a series that I want to deal with a subject, then I read it. So it's work reading now. And I have to make myself in the summer and sometimes in between Christmas and New Year's, we shut the church down that week, give the staff that week off. I try in the summer, during that week, and when I travel, to read stuff other than work-related stuff. Yeah, to rediscover the joy. So I love reading. I love walking. I've been a walker all my life. And golf. Those are my three. Wow, that is a good question. Now, you know what? What would be? I think people know I'm sentimental. It comes across in my preaching. Wow, that is a good question. This may not surprise them, but they don't know it. I was really spoiled as a child. Don't say anything. I was really spoiled as a child because my grandmother, my grandfather, my mom, my aunts, and even my sisters, they all spoiled me. I was spoiled as a child. Okay. I outgrew it quick, but Wow, that's a great question. This is funny. I had several because the way we grew up. So Pastor Kelly, who's our executive pastor, Howard Scott, whose dad pastored First Baptist in Rockaway, Pierre Cooper. I don't know if you remember Pierre. He lived here and was on our ministerial team for a while. You probably don't remember. Me, yeah. And George Stubbs, who just was buried last Friday. We could go today. George died week before last, they buried him. And he and Pastor Kelly and Pierre and Howard were all in my wedding. Yeah. Wow, now that's great. Music, I love music. You've heard me say, and others have heard me say, no one loves music more than me and has less in them than me. I'm just not musically inclined, but I love music. But I also love poetry because I love the written word. But music, poetry, yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know, I'm not a sweet eater, but I love vanilla ice cream, which is really weird. I love vanilla ice cream. I like peach ice cream too. And my favorite dessert would be apple pie, followed by sweet potato pie and pound cake. Those three. Those three, no more. Wow. I think my favorite quote, and I have so many that I love, but at Robert Kennedy's funeral, his brother, Edward Kennedy, quoted someone who said, and he spoke of his brother, some people see things as they are and merely ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not. I think that is so powerful. To dream things as they've never been, as they are not, and then raise the question, why not? The people who do that are world changers. They're world changers. Yeah, that'd be my favorite. Second one behind that would be, that a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for. There's so much power in that if all I have is what I can grasp, and that's as far as my reach is gone, then I'll never have more than that. But if my reach can go past my grasp, that's what heaven is for. Heaven is for the not yet, which ties into the first quote, things that have never been. Yeah. I think I try to live by the precepts, teachings of Jesus, to love my neighbor and the world because of social media technology is really a village. And this is where Sean is getting tested for me every day, because my neighbor very often are persons on Facebook or whatever who I violently, vehemently disagree with. And I am called to love my neighbor as I love myself. And it was so much easier when you lived in a very cloistered context, you know. But now your neighbor can be in a totally different country, but you see him every day on Facebook, and they're saying things you would give your life to oppose, but you still have to love them. Yeah, it's tough to do sometimes. Slow down. I'm trying to see how to say this. I think people who are possessed of a sense of who they are get in a hurry, because again, they see things that have never been and say, why not? And I think even at 15, I know at 15, I was so aware of where I was going and what I knew God had for me, that I think I didn't slow down. I enjoyed every season of my life, but I know I might have been able to enjoy it more had I ratcheted back a little bit. So I would say to my 15-year-old self, it's going to come. Slow down. Cultivate, develop some things that you'll need down the road, 40, 45 years down the road, 50 years, oh gosh, 50 years down the road. I would actually be talking to myself 50 years ahead of time, 50 years down the road. Yeah, again, my life, Sean, you know this, very open. I've been very honest about my birth. My mom and dad were not married. I grew up in a single parent home, mostly raised by our grandmother and grandfather. Our grandfather died August of 1962, and he was so much a father figure for all of his grandkids. My grandparents had three daughters. Um, I think Aunt Betty was the oldest, Aunt Bertha and my mom, and who was the baby. And so we all lived in New York. They were from Georgia. My grandfather was from Florida. Met my grandmother. They were in Savannah. That's where the children were born, and then came to New York. So we all lived pretty much with our grandparents. And even after Grandpa died, we were still in that house. So everybody knows my story growing up like that. Major moments in my life, man. Some major in the sense spiritual. When I gave my life to the Lord, when I was baptized, things like that. In school, student government, those kind of things. Girlfriends, you flirt, puppy love, whatever. I think then ministry, my call to ministry, and getting married, getting called to my first church in Warren, and becoming a dad. Then we moved here. Our second child was born. So Dee Dee was born in Warren. Jocelyn was born here. And watching this church grow from a very small church to what God has blessed it to be. Involvement in our community, denominationally, giving leadership at many levels, and now being a grandpa and looking towards sunset, and what it will mean for me ultimately to retire and hand this church off to a younger person who will take it far beyond what I did. And I think that's something a leader would want. You would want your successor to take it further and higher, because it means you built a good foundation. Yeah. Almost everybody in this church knows that I want to retire. If you ask people, what is Bishop going to do? And they'll say he's going to retire, move to North Carolina, build a home on the golf course, and he's going to preach 4 times a year. And these are the 4 times. The 2 Sundays when time changes. No preacher likes preaching on those Sundays because nobody gets the time right. And then the Sunday after Easter, which is always a letdown for every pastor because Easter's way up here and it's packed, and then the next Sunday the others come back, and that's a down Sunday. So I'm going to find a young preacher and I'm going to say, listen, I'm going to take those 3 Sundays from you, and then the 4th Sunday will be a throwaway Sunday. If there's a pastor who calls and say, look, I don't feel like preaching today, I'm going to go preach. Other than that, I'm going to be on the golf course.